she's like conservative.
Okay.
To be fair, like she's over Labour.
Is it? Oh, okay. Some people are though.
Yeah, or Labour's, you know what I
They've
mean?
been given their chances. And
Yeah,
they've put us into a lot of debt.
yeah. A lot of the parties now, even from before, but like Labour before, you could like, you know what I mean, rely on them to do certain things, and they had the interest of the black people. That's what I mean. You got when I
But
asked
I
you
don't
like,
think so anymore.
not anymore. Like that's what I'm saying.
I think
It's mad because it's like blasphemy. Astaghfirullah, but I'm saying for me to not vote Labour.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
my
I
mum
get you.
always voted
Yeah.
Labour.
Yeah.
Like we're just a Labour. My dad
Yeah, but that's
was
what I'm
a
saying,
Labour rep. Remember, my dad's a politician, you know.
That's because back
Okay,
in
I
the
didn't
day,
know that.
Yeah, my dad's a politician. My uncle was the first prime minister of Dominica, my island.
Ah,
But they're
guess.
both Labourettes.
yo,
You
come
get
on,
me? It's
because back
big
in
up Skerritt as well. Roosevelt, that's the prime minister right now in government. My cousin as well, he's the MP of Maho. That was my dad was the MP, so we're still governing. But there's madness. There's people not rating government right now.
Wow, that's very interesting. Because if you noticed what happened, he was arguing policy, they were arguing race. The moment he mentioned his support for reform, the debate shifted from politics to identity. You see, this has gone beyond reform. It's about the idea that your political choice should align with your race. And when that doesn't, people question your loyalty. And right now, you see similar in the US. Black conservatives, Latino Republicans, voters being told that they are betraying their own community. So now, the real question isn't just about reform. It's about whether voting is tribal or individual. So guys, should your vote reflect your race or your beliefs? Let me know in the comment section.
My dog is a bitch. To raise your bar. New Clip Energy Bites.
Hey, it's Giannis talking ball with Google. Everyone knows my Eurostep is unstoppable, but today we're using Google search to find out exactly why. Show me how much of the court Giannis can cover with his Eurostep. 15 feet was pure dominance.
Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Coleman. My guest today is Oren Kessler. Oren Kessler is a writer, journalist, and political analyst whose work has appeared in Foreign Affairs and Foreign Policy, The Wall Street Journal, and The Washington Post. He's also the author of Palestine 1936, The Great Revolt and the Roots of the Middle East Conflict. This episode is all about the Arab revolt of the late 1930s, back when what is today Israel was British Mandate Palestine. That revolt set the stage for the war that Israelis call the War of Independence and Arabs call the Nakba. And we could see the seed of many features of today's Israel-Palestine conflict in that revolt. In this conversation, we also talk about whether it's true, as Dave Smith and others frequently allege, that Israel introduced terrorism into the region. So without further ado, Oren Kessler. Okay, Oren Kessler, thanks so much for coming on my show.
Thank you so much, Coleman, for having me.
I've been a fan for a long time. Your book on Palestine 1936, which is like one of the only comprehensive books for the general public on the very important Arab riots from 36 to 39, is excellent. I highly recommend people read it, and that's a lot of what we'll cover today. We'll also cover some general topics on the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict and maybe a few of your thoughts about what's going on now. Before we get to that, how did you come to have such an interest in the late 1930s Mandate Palestine, and what was your background up to that point that led you to write that book?
Yeah, a bit of background on me. I grew up in upstate New York for the most part, in Rochester, and a little bit here in Tel Aviv, where I'm talking to you from. I was a journalist and a think tanker for a long time. I was a journalist here in Israel at Haaretz, Jerusalem Post. I covered Arab affairs. Was a translator for a while. And then got a stringer for foreign policy in a few other places. And then I started sort of think tanking in London and in DC. I was in DC for about 5 years. I was deputy research director at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. But I'd always been kind of a history buff, and I'd always had a somewhat masochistic urge to write about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. My parents are from here. My parents are both from Israel, from Tel Aviv. And as I mentioned, we lived here for a bit when I was growing up. And for whatever reason, I always wanted to write a book about this place, but I very quickly discovered that a lot of other people had had that exact same idea. And so it was really, I was quite discouraged for a while, recognizing that seemingly every aspect of this history, this conflict had been written about from 15 different angles. But then I discovered this period of the Great Arab Revolts, 1936 to 39, which was really very much underwritten about, understudied, underknown, if that's a word, but really seminal and formative and decisive in sort of shaping the conflict as we know it today in many ways, and just populated by really fascinating, compelling characters on all three sides. And it's important to remember there are three sides. It's a triangle in this period. There are the Arabs, the Jews, and of course the Brits who were running the show. And so that was really sort of the impetus, just to kind of fill that gap. That was really fun. Literature of telling the story of this revolt and everything that emanated from it for all sides, for the Arab side, for the Jewish side, for the conflict, for attempts to resolve the conflict, and just sort of the legacies thereof until today.
So, given your identity as a Jew and you live in Israel, obviously writing about the history of this conflict, inevitably people on the other side, many of them will just dismiss any argument in the book that you don't like, or any section of the book that they don't like, as partisan, right? Like you're partisan to the conflict, so how can you play the role of objective historian? They would say. How do you approach, trying to write a work of history, knowing that at some level you have a dog in the fight?
By the time I was 11, I had been a refugee twice. My family had been forced to abandon our home and seek refuge in different lands. As a child, I remember playing in the bomb craters of a city ravaged by war and wearing worn and ill-fitting clothes that others perhaps considered as not especially fashionable. Since we came from different areas, others of my age sometimes ridiculed me because of my accent and made fun of me because I didn't fit in. I can understand the hardship many of you are enduring. It is no accident that I'm speaking to you in front of these miraculous machines that have the capacity of defying gravity, climbing higher and higher, and soaring onto new horizons. When I was a young man wondering what path I should take, I found myself at the outskirts of the Frankfurt airport in Germany, watching airplanes take off and land with amazing grace and precision. How I wanted to sit in the cockpit of one of those beautiful flying machines. I knew that the fulfillment of such a dream
not really defined
easily. I would have to spend long hours, day and night, learning and engaging myself, which appeared almost beyond my abilities. I needed to learn English. That was a language my tongue somehow was not designed to speak. How would that ever be possible? Because my dream was so compelling, these things stopped being obligations. Instead, they became opportunities. Yes, they were difficult. Yes, at times the effort seemed too hard, and I wanted to quit. But I knew if I pressed on, if I gave it my all, the Lord would help me. I learned of the reality of the scriptural promises. If God be for us, what can be against us? And for with God, nothing is impossible. I weep with you. I rejoice with you. I feel with you. I love you. I want you also to know that you are not alone. Your Heavenly Father knows you. He hears your prayers. He is aware of your every tear. He loves you with infinite love and watches over you. Even when you might feel you're alone, you are not, because He is always there. You are not alone. Never, ever. Remember, Jesus Christ is your strength. He loves you. He stands with you. He is there. He loves you. As you move forward and upward, you will bless your own life and the lives of countless others in turn.
What even is?
Right.
Yeah, it's a great question. I somehow, this may be bad to say it, but somehow I've gotten much less flack.
I thought it was part of the interview.
I knew I was stepping into a minefield. I expected to get it from all directions, but really, if anything, I've gotten a little more flack from the sort of pro-Israel side, but not that much. The only, at the risk of sounding conceited, the only negative reviews, editorial reviews that the book has gotten, now 3 years later, when the book came out in Hebrew, because of course Israelis are a very, very critical society, and the critics here have some thoughts. But other than that, I've gotten, the book has been well received as far as I know, including from sort of pro-Palestinian quarters and critics. In terms of how to navigate that, it's very difficult.
Of course, he's from Mahara. It's like,
there's,
of course,
you know, there's probably no such thing as objective history. There's, with every choice that you make as a historian, as a writer, every choice of what you choose to include and not include, that's a choice. And oftentimes you don't know why you're making these choices, right? It's not a deliberate. It's like, okay, I'm going to put this in to show this. You don't know what exactly is operating behind, you know, what's interesting to you, what's compelling, and what's not. But what I tried to do in this book is really to find the most kind of eloquent spokespeople on all three sides, and let them make their best case to the reader, and then let the reader draw his or her own conclusions. So, for example, on the Arab side, one of my main characters is a guy named George Antonius, who is a very prominent Cambridge-educated Arab intellectual, originally from Lebanon, lived in Jerusalem many years. And he wrote a book called The Arab Awakening in 1937-38, which was very, very influential. It was kind of the seminal book in English, anyway, on Arab nationalism. And so there's another man, Musa Alami, who's also a Cambridge man. And these are in my book, and they're very eloquent. They're very, especially Alami is very sympathetic in his way. Very, very charming, very, very intelligent. Had a lot of friendships across ethnic and religious lines. And so through these really compelling characters, this sounds like a Columbia seminar or something, but I try to complicate the, you know, I think the reader sometimes feels like, oh wow, that's a really good point. Oh shit, this other side is a really good point, and because it's very, very complex at the end of the day.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of elements and quotes from both of those people, as well as other more known figures like Ben Gurion and Al Husseini, that I hadn't seen in other histories, more broad histories of the Arab-Israeli conflict. So I highly recommend that for people. It was it was also a fun read, actually. So thank you for writing that book.
Thank you so much, Coleman.
So let's see, where do I want to start? let me start with this point because it's one I raised recently that I've been thinking about. I've sometimes been called a Zionist because, on Joe Rogan and other spheres, talking to Dave Smith, I defend Israel's right to defend itself from terrorists on its borders. I think the establishment of the State of Israel was a defensible choice, certainly defensible choice at the time. And now that it's there, I defend its right to maintain its security the same way I feel I would defend Australia's right to maintain its security against dissolve the Australian state. But I don't answer to the word Zionist. I've never quite understood why I would need to be, someone like me would need to be categorized as a Zionist, or that there needs to be the word Zionism at all. And someone on the internet put it this way, which I very much recognize myself in, which is like, I'm very much against slavery. I would never call myself an abolitionist. Why? Because the abolitionist movement was a specific historical movement that took place in the 18th and 19th century. It achieved its aim, which was to abolish slavery legally. And now abolitionists only exist in history books, right? Zionists were a movement that wanted to establish a Jewish state somewhere in Palestine. That state was established in 1948. It's been a UN member state since then. And now Zionists, in my view, only exist in history books. What do you make of the word Zionist? Is it necessary? Is it useful? And do you identify as one?
The hardest thing is to get started. You have to get it on.
Close.
We have started to deal with computers in higher and higher levels of abstraction. Just push a button.
I agree with you completely, and I've heard you make that point with, I think it was Dave Smith and on some other podcasts. I think it's incredibly strange that this word still exists, only for this country, and as you say, there's no comparable word for any other country. There's no, whether Pakistan should or shouldn't exist is not debated, other than I presume a few diehards in India, maybe more than a few, are still angry about it. But it's not a worldwide topic of discussion. So I would agree that, to be a Zionist, even a sort of passive by default Zionist, just means you're not trying to dismantle this country or completely overhaul its demographics. And I'm not aware of any other country where anyone other than perhaps the parties involved, I know that there are, Serbs and Kosovars have beef, and Indians and Pakistanis, and there are all kinds of beefs and rivalries and conflicts in the world. But for this to be a topic of conversation that the entire world is going to have an opinion on whether this country should exist strikes me as incredibly strange and suspect. So all this is to say, I essentially agree with you. In fact, I think the India-Pakistan comparison is incredibly apt in many ways, and it's one that I'm not quite sure why it's not made more often. This was the partition of India was a year before the partition of Palestine. Both of them, of course, were part of the British Empire. You even have the similarity of the I side and the B side, oddly enough. I'm no expert at all in the partition of India, but just at face value, you've got one side that wants independence based solely on religion, right? My understanding is that Urdu and Hindi are essentially interchangeable, other than the script that they're written in, and some.
Yeah, the differences are emphasized because of the political divisions, but
right.
Yeah, it's like British English and American English, maybe even more similar.
Right. I understand that they're even more different than, say, German and Yiddish, right? Yiddish is often described as German and Hebrew characters, but Hindi and Urdu, as I understand it, are essentially interchangeable, mutually understandable. It's really the only difference. I'm sure I'm simplifying here, but the difference is a religious one. And the movement for Muslim independence in India succeeded. despite the wishes of Gandhi and others. And the fallout from that partition was so massive. The damage, the cost in blood and treasure was so massive. But it's over for the world. Again, except for some folks in India, it's over. Pakistan, nobody has an opinion on whether Pakistan should exist. I suspect, at the risk of getting ahead of my skis, I suspect Mayor Mamdani doesn't stay up at night bemoaning the the existence of Pakistan. Whereas, right, you have, I think something like 15 million people were displaced in that partition on both sides, I believe, and at least 500,000 were killed. I mean, horrific human suffering, right? And yet, on the Israel-Palestine question, everyone is meant to be an expert and a revisionist, and it strikes me as incredibly odd. So it's either that the circumstances in which Israel was born are so nefarious that it alone among the nations needs to be undone, or there's something else going on that to me is quite suspect. All of this is to say, I'm a dual citizen of the U.S. and Israel. The vast majority of Jewish Israelis want this country to continue to be what it is. So that would make me a Zionist. And I would add, there was an interesting poll of American Jews recently in which they asked about this word, the Z word, and about 1/3 of American Jews, I hope I'm getting this right, 1/3 of American Jews, perhaps it's 1/3 of young American Jews, I think it was 1/3 of all Jews identify as Zionists, all Jews. And then they asked, okay, do you want Israel to continue to exist as a Jewish and democratic state? And 8 in 10 said, yeah, of course. So then they're Zionists. If you're not trying to dismantle, I listened to your podcast with Robert Wright, and he said, there was a moment that I recognized I was Zionist because I realized I support the two-state solution. So, that's all it requires to be Zionist. I think it's been a tremendously effective PR campaign by the, call them pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel crowd to make this word really toxic, to make it right up there with white supremacist, racist, you name it. And I've really noticed the difference just in the past few years, that it's really it's been a very, very successful branding of this word as something that nobody or very few people want to be associated with.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because it's almost akin to the idea of being an American colonist, right? It's like at a certain point in history, there were many people that strongly felt Americans should conquer all of North America or most of North America. And essentially that happened, right? Like we instigated war with Mexico, we took territory, we took it from the Indians, we pushed them further west. All kinds of things were done out of a strong belief that from sea to shining sea, we had a destiny handed down from God, actually. And so to be an American colonist sort of meant something in that context. Now that America's here to stay, and we have the international norm that borders are grandfathered in, pretty much no matter how they got there, because almost all borders involved, atrocities, wars, forced migrations, tragedies, and so forth. There's very few innocent situations of nations just kind of coming into their territory peacefully. That's not what history looks like, even though some on the left would like to paint, indigenous histories as if there wasn't war and human sacrifice and conquest. And then you run into questions like, well, how did the Aztec Empire get so big? Did they just were born that big? They were the only. How did China become so large? It was just, for some reason, a third of Asia was speaking the same language overnight. Well, no, all of these things involved a mix of conquest and violence and voluntary conversion and all kinds of things. So once that norm is there, I think it behooves the world to just accept it. So I want to get into some aspects of your book that are interesting to me. I mean, one, sticking on my Dave Smith podcast, one of the points he made, and it's a common talking point among anti-Israel folks, is that actually Jews introduced terror to the region of if you want to call it historic Palestine. And this is often, this point is often used as a way of justifying Palestinian terror today. In other words, how can you really be against terror targeting civilians for political aims or targeting property for political aims when that's exactly what Jewish groups like Lehigh did against the British? So that I guess there's two related points. One is like, does Jewish terror during the Mandate period justify Palestinian terror today? Does that make Jews hypocrites to complain about Hamas? That's one point. And then there's the historical point. Did Jews introduce terror to this region where that tactic was previously unknown?
I'll take the second question first because it's so easy to answer, which is no. Clearly, I don't know of any reputable historian, maybe I need to read more widely, who believes that. There's the Lehi, which you mentioned, this hardline extremist, you could say, Jewish group, is founded in 1941. So in the period of my book, 36 to 39, in which I would remind, well, I don't need to remind you because you've read the book, but I would remind listeners, 500 Jews and about 250 British servicemen were killed in the Arab Revolt. And so Lehi didn't exist yet at that point. What did exist in the mid and late 30s was an organization called the Irgun, also known as Etzel, acronym, the National Military Organization. And this organization really started in 1937, starts to wage attacks that can only be described as terrorism. We're talking about leaving bombs in Arab vegetable markets with the intention of killing Arab civilians. If that's not terrorism, then nothing is. And so certainly starting in 1937, you have an organized Jewish group, not large by any means, but an organized Jewish group that wages dozens of these attacks. It's all in my book. That said, this is many years after Arab terrorism appeared on the scene in Mandate Palestine. The first sort of you could say mass casualty attack at Mandate Palestine is before the Palestine Mandate is even ratified. It's in April 1920, called the Nabi Musa riots, in which it actually doesn't sound that like mass casualties by today's standards, but about five Jews were killed and many more wounded in and around Jerusalem. And then in 1921, you had the Jaffa riots, in which 50-some Jews were killed. That's just a year after. And then more famously, infamously, you have the 1929 Hebron riots, which were in Hebron and Tzfat and a few other places in the country, which were very incredibly grim and gruesome, really reminiscent of the October 7th attacks in their cruelty, in which 133 Jews were killed, and there were quite a few instances of rape and just really horrific violence. So that was all 1929. And so this is not to excuse for a moment the act of leaving bombs in the Arab vegetable market in Haifa, but the notion that the Jews started it has no basis in history. What the Arab argument was in the period by more articulate figures like George Antonius, which was, this political, but the Arab physical violence is a direct response to the moral and political violence that's being done against us with this mass Jewish immigration, with withholding our national rights, while all our Arab brethren around us are moving towards independence. We are stuck in this strange and in their mind unjust system called the Jewish national home, in which of course, the Balfour Declaration is enshrined, and Britain is committed under its League of Nations obligations to facilitate large-scale Jewish immigration to the land, post-settlement on the land. So that's how I would look at it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this early period is that you can just, I at least can just easily see the argument on both sides, right? Like if I put myself in the shoes of a Jewish refugee at any point from 1880 to 1945, whether it's I'm fleeing massacres in my Russian village, where pogroms swept after the change in Tsar, or whether I'm fleeing Nazi Germany, fleeing Poland, whatever it is, and the entire world after 1920 or so, 24, is basically closed off to me. I can't go to New York anymore. That's where Jews had been going for a very long time. You can't go to Canada, you basically can't go anywhere because of the quotas. And I'm very reasonably fleeing for my life. And now there's this Jewish community in British Mandate Palestine that wants me, that will protect me. And there's a community of Jews that are organizing around self-defense in our historic homeland that we've been praying to for thousands of years, right? So I mean, and by the way, the vast majority of this immigration is simply legal immigration, right? It's legal immigration to a political entity, whether it's the Ottoman Empire. You immigrate there legally, you purchase land from a willing Arab seller, and you join this community of co-religionists, right? Like all of that to me is perfectly understandable and defensible. And then when I look at it through the other lens, we say, okay, you live in this community that's majority Arab. It's been majority Arab for a very long time, and you're an Arab. You speak Arabic. You're probably Muslim. Maybe you're Christian. But all of a sudden, this mass immigration event into what you view as your homeland starts, right? And it's one with nationalist aspirations that are sometimes downplayed in public, but are clear and real. And the power of the British Empire is backing those nationalist aspirations in a place where your people are the majority. And you haven't had control of this entity for hundreds of years because it's been controlled by the Turks. All of a sudden, the Turks are gone. Everyone's getting their own state or their own territory. And you feel that since you're the majority, and since this mass immigration event by Jews is so recent, that it belongs to you, right? Not only that, it's not a democracy. So, if it were a democracy in 1920, you would win, you would shut down the borders, and it would be an Arab state. But you have, you feel you have no way of actually manifesting that political will because it's not a democracy. And so what do? You take up arms, right? And that is like that feeling of wanting to maintain a demographic majority is one that almost any group of people similar to place would have. And so, my side with the idea that Israel is here to stay and has the right to defend itself, it can easily be taken as a negation that the Palestinians had any valid argument or have any valid nationalist argument. But that's certainly not what I've ever meant to convey by it. And I think reading your book, and especially the more moderate Arab,
that's relatively close.
The Al-Husseinis of the world, with the George Antonius and the other gentleman you mentioned, really brings forth that there always has been a valid Palestinian nationalist aspiration.
Yeah, I don't think.
This is where culture moves you, where joy is shared, and every moment speaks your language. Awaken your senses. Discover Puerto Rico.
I don't think even proud Israelis or Zionists or whatever should be all that shocked or surprised that the that Arabs of the time didn't want Jews coming here en masse. Very few people in world history have wanted other peoples coming to lands that they're living on en masse. There was some sentiment at the time in certain quarters that saw, in the Arab community, that saw some benefit economically and otherwise to very small scale Jewish immigration. But that was the minority position. And certainly once the British Mandate began, following of course, you have the Balfour Declaration in November 1917, and then the Mandate begins really in the early 20s, 1920, 2022. And really the numbers just start growing and growing. They really take off in the 30s, particularly after Hitler comes to power in January 1933, and other anti-Semitic movements are on the ascendant across Europe, in Poland and Hungary and Romania. And so the numbers just keep climbing and climbing. And so in 1935, you have 60,000 Jews coming to this land legally, and perhaps some more illegally, we don't quite know. But the majority of them legally.
Yeah, I have a relative that got in illegally, but the majority is legal. Majority of my family got in.
Subsistence farmers in the countryside who perhaps many of whom were still illiterate in this period, were certainly perceptive enough to recognize that the face of this land was changing rapidly, and that if things went on this way, the Jews would be a majority before long. Because in the period that I'm writing about, 36 to 39, kind of the core of my book, the Jews are already approaching roughly 300,000 people, which is about 30% of the population. And so, again, it really shouldn't be all that shocking that there was Arab opposition to this. The question, of course, then as now, but especially then, was how they responded. And of course, it was sort of from the Arab or Palestinian perspective, the argument is often heard that, well, we tried diplomacy, we tried to work within the boundaries of the law, and when that didn't work, we turned to violence. And there's a certain way in which you can make that argument, and you can say that the revolt was a result of desperation. They had tried everything else. On the other hand, as I mentioned, there were outbursts of violence, serious violence, right at the get-go, right at the start of the Mandate. And so, yes, that's all a very long-winded way to say. I think the fundamental, that's really, there's a figure in my book and in the history of this land called Vladimir Jabotinsky.
You're just like a
ideologue, the intellectual inspiration. Yeah, let's say the ideological forerunner of sort of right-wing Zionism. He's really ideologically sort of the ancestor of the Likud and other right-wing Zionist movements today. And what he says, and he's no slouch, no peacenik himself, but he says the tragedy is that this is a conflict of right against right. This is very rarely in human history is there a case in which right is all on one side or another. But in this case, it's really a question of right against right. But he said, in his view, the Jewish case was nonetheless stronger. It was the difference between I forget the exact metaphor, but I think it was something like a starving man and a man who'd like another helping at the table, or something like that. So he viewed the Jewish condition, the Jewish plight, as so desperate as to override the rightness and the justice of the Palestinian Arab claim.
Right, and so in the case where there's two rights, where both sides have a legitimate claim to a state or nationalist aspiration in the same region, the logical thing is to compromise. And though what I've been saying is that I can sort of equally see it from both sides, the way it's not symmetric is in the total unwillingness of the Arab leaders who actually mattered at key points, like al-Husseini, to compromise. And that through line throughout the history. Consistently, Jewish leaders have many times begrudgingly, many times with with longer-term hopes to get more territory, but they have been willing to compromise at key points, the Peel Commission, the UN partition, and so forth. But Arab leaders have not been willing to compromise, and so the notion that we tried diplomacy, so now we have to do violence. Even if you want to make a true version of that argument,
how do I get faster?
You have to change it to become, we tried using diplomacy to get everything we wanted, to get 100% of what we wanted. And when that failed, now we have to try violence to get 100% of what we wanted. The notion of using diplomacy or whatever to get 50% of what we want has been so taboo in the Arab community for such a long time. One of the lessons you could take from the Great Arab Revolt of the late 30s is that terrorism works, because Palestinians had a goal of reducing Jewish immigration, and they met that goal. Zooming out to the broader history of the conflict, to what extent do you think Palestinian terror has worked as a tactic, and to what extent do you think it works for them today?
So I think in the period of the revolt,
that's nothing, but I've improved that, I guess.
After the first 6 months of revolt, which was matched by a general strike, actually one of the longest general strikes anywhere in history, the Arab economy cut all contact with the Jewish economy.
That was a crazy improvement.
And after these 6 months, the British agreed to send a royal commission, known to history as the Peel Commission, after its chairman, Lord Peel. And this is the highest form of inquiry in the British Empire. This is answering to the king directly. It's in the name of the king. And they send this delegation over here to the Holy Land. And they spend several months here. And they
that could have been faster.
Prominent Jews and dozens of British administrators, and eventually a number of prominent Arabs. I say eventually because the Grand Mufti, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who is the head of the Supreme Muslim Council and is by far and away the most prominent, the most powerful Arab and Muslim in Palestine, and appointed by the British, the Mufti boycotts the proceedings completely because they refuse to stop Jewish immigration completely at the get-go. So he boycotts the proceedings until the 11th hour, and then finally, as they're about to leave, he says, okay, you know what, we'll talk. And so they speak to the Mufti and a few other prominent Arabs, and they go back to England, and they write this very long report. And the report ultimately ends up being sort of a win for the Jews, because it's the first time in history, it's the first time in Palestine's modern history that this notion of a two-state solution is put on the table, this idea of partition, this radical, dramatic, revolutionary solution to this burgeoning Jewish-Arab conflict, namely a two-state solution. This whole idea of a Jewish state, not just the Jewish national home as pledged by Balfour, but a state with everything that means. And so that is seen as a tremendous win by the Jews, even though the state only comprises about 17-18% of the land between the river and the sea. But nonetheless, the fact that the British send this commission is very much recognizing Arab grievances. And then the real undeniable achievement of the Arab Revolt and Arab violence comes 2 years later, in 1939, in the White Paper. And so in mid-1939, this is obviously a crucial, critical, perilous time for the Jews of Europe. Britain decides to wash its hands of the whole Palestine affair. The war clouds are gathering over Europe. It seems to be a question of when, not if, war with Hitler is going to come. The Brits have already lost some 200 plus servicemen in Palestine. There's a huge troop deployment to Palestine, the biggest between the world wars for Britain, and they decide it's not worth it anymore. They're particularly worried about, getting back to India, they're particularly worried about Muslim opinion in British India. This is pre-partition India. It includes the lands we now call Pakistan and Bangladesh with their large Muslim populations, and they were worried that if the Muslims of India, of the empire, were angry about Palestine, that it would cause real problems for the war effort. And so they call a conference in London and they produce this white paper, this policy paper, this statement of policy, which basically says we're done. Basically says this Balfour experiment has essentially reached its aim. There is a Jewish national home now of 300,000 people, and basically from here on out, any further, or it sets a cap on Jewish immigration of 75,000 total over 5 years, which may sound like a lot, but consider that in 1935, 60,000 Jews came to Mandate Palestine legally in 1 year, and now the limit is 75,000 over 5 years. And again, this is 1939, on the cusp of the Second World War, and as we know in hindsight, the Holocaust. And after that point, any further immigration would be contingent on Arab consent, which everyone understood would not be forthcoming. And so this is a tremendous win for the Arabs. But the Mufti, and so you have celebrations in the streets of Nazareth and Nablus, and it's seen as finally the sacrifices that the Arabs have themselves made in their revolt are finally seem to be vindicated. But the Mufti, this doesn't go far enough for the Mufti surprises by rejecting this, because instead of, he doesn't want 75,000 Jews, he wants 0 Jews, and he doesn't want independence in 5 to 10 years, he wants it now. And so the Mufti, as many of your listeners know, will become infamous in the Second World War. He spends it in Berlin, meets with Himmler several times, meets famously with Hitler once, and really becomes the most important propagandist and recruiter for the Nazis in the Arab and Muslim world. All of this to say, the violence of the Arab revolt real gains.
It was time.
Arab Palestine, but their leadership
both checkpoints were as fast
and so inept that they were not able to capitalize on any of them.
At YoPlay, we always select the best strawberries, perfectly ripe. That's why our yogurt is so good. YoPlay, America's favorite strawberry yogurt.
There's a couple nuggets in your book that were really interesting to me, because they bear on this core question of what the
I'm unfamiliar with what
hatred and fighting of Jews in that land is really about. One thing it might be about is nationalist aspirations of the kind that are recognizable all over the world. Groups of people that speak one language, feel like one nation, they want to have a nation state. Another thing it could be about is jihad. In other words, a religious motivation that comes from scripture, that comes from the idea that Jews and Christians are non-believers, they reject the Prophet Muhammad, and that the proper political organization ordained by the Quran is a Muslim state where all other people of the book, Jews and Christians, live as dhimmis, as second-class citizens, and that it's a further affront for Jews to have any level of control over anything that's been a Muslim land at any point. And whether Palestinian terrorists or political groups are motivated by the former or the latter is pretty important, because it's possible to compromise on nationalism, on territory and so forth. It's much harder to compromise if the motivations are religious. Jihadism, as we've seen from ISIS to Al-Qaeda, is a totalizing philosophy that admits of no compromise, really. And I think there are interesting elements in your history that sort of bear on the question. One that was
okay, I don't know where, but I hit.
Was that I think this is like in 1919, the first Palestine Arab Congress happens, and the initial ask from the Arabs of Palestine is not to have a country called Palestine, but it's to be part of Syria, to be the southern part of Syria, right? And this is interesting to me because it puts an outer bound on when true Palestinian nationalism, like a distinct Palestinian identity and political consciousness, could have arisen. Obviously, this is very controversial territory for people, because people on the pro-Palestine side of this debate want to say, like, Palestinian identity has been a thing as distinct from Arab identity for hundreds of years or something like that. But the fact that in 1919 the obvious ask from the Arabs of the region was no. I mean, there's an Ottoman, basically county of the Ottoman state called Syria. That's what we're a part of, and we want to be part of a Arab version of Syria.
Erling Haaland.
What is your view on sort of when a distinct Palestinian national identity arose, and also an even bigger question, to what extent is the anger directed at Jews a product of nationalism as opposed to religious belief?
Yeah, so I think it's a plausible reading of history. I think it's the likeliest reading of history that if Zionism had not really happened, not really taken off, if the Jews hadn't come here in significant numbers, this land would almost certainly be part of a greater Syria. That was, as you mentioned, that was kind of the goal, the ask after the First World War. There was the kind of a Syrian-Palestinian Congress. Even the Mufti before he was the Mufti, he in the riots of 1920 that I mentioned, when he was just a young man, he was actually convicted in absentia by the Brits for riling up the crowd, and he he was holding up a portrait of King Faisal of Syria, the very short-lived Hashemite king of Syria, the king of Iraq, and saying, "This is your king. This is your king." And so it was, and even in the period of my book, 1936, 7, 8, 9, when the Mufti rejects this two-state solution that I mentioned in 1937, when the Arab leadership rejects this proposal, the statement that they put out says Palestine will be Arab, will be independent in a wider Arab federation or something like that. That's almost an exact quote. Palestine will be Arab, will be free and in an Arab confederation. So there were different, even as late as the 1930s, it wasn't entirely clear and obvious. There was not only one sort of voice in terms of what the Palestinian Arabs wanted. The unanimity, or the near unanimity, was we could say unanimity was against Zionism, was on arresting the growth of immigration and land purchases and any advance towards any kind of Jewish autonomy. But so it was quite clear what they were against. But but in terms of what the end goal was, it was not, even as late as the 30s and arguably the 40s, it was not at all clear. And so look, I don't mean to suggest that there was no notion at all of Palestinian identity before the 40s or even before the British Mandate. I mean, there was an Arabic newspaper here in Jaffa called Filastin before 1917. So clearly the word existed in some way, shape, or form. But typically, this land to Arabic speakers was typically referred to. It was typically, if you were in Jerusalem, it was Jerusalem. If you were in Nablus, it was Nablus. But in general, this land was considered southern Syria for the most part. And there's even a somewhat well-known quote by a member of the Khalidi family, one of the major families, the great Arab families of Jerusalem. Of course, Rashid Khalidi is a prominent professor at Columbia, of course. There's a member of the Khalidi family who complains to, I can't remember if it was complaining to Herzl or to the Brits, that I think it was to the Brits, where he says, this word Palestine was invented by the Zionists. For us, it was always southern Syria. And so it's complicated, but the notion that there was a distinct Palestinian identity, going back to the Canaanites, I think is rather a stretch. In terms of I think, and I don't think Palestinian nationalism is alone in this, and that so much of it develops in relation to something else, and as a mirror image or reaction to something else. I don't think that necessarily delegitimizes it.
It's common actually throughout history.
It's extremely common, and so you could even argue that's the norm in some ways, but yeah. So that's the question. And the question of religion, look, I think on the whole there was a significant, there still is, but there was a large significant Christian Arab minority here during the Mandate. Bethlehem was still majority Christian. Now it's very much a minority. And when you look at the sort of aggregate Christian attitude to the revolt, look, I never found a single instance of a Christian Arab taking up arms against the British or the Jews. It may have happened, but in 5 years of research, I never found a single instance.
Wow.
Which may come as news to anyone who's seen Anne-Marie Jasser's film Palestine 36, but I wrote a piece about that in the Free Press but that's a different discussion perhaps. In any case, in terms of violence, there was little to none on the part of Christians. What there was is there was certainly a significant element of the Christian community here, the Arab Christian community, that agreed with the political aims of the revolt, namely Palestine needs to be, whether it's in a confederation or independent, it needs to retain a strong Arab majority.
Okay, close. I think that was actually
other reserves of Christian Arabs here who probably would have wanted the British Mandate to remain indefinitely. Is kind of a hedge, kind of a safety, safety mechanism. There's a line in my book written by the editor of Philistine, the most prominent Arabic paper. There's a Christian guy named Yusuf Hanna, and this was some of the most illuminating material that I found in my research, were these letters between him and the correspondent for the New York Times, who was a Jewish Jerusalem-born, anti-Zionist, Arabic-speaking, a guy by the name of Joseph Levy, and they had very, very candid correspondence between them. And at a certain point, this editor, Jewish New York Times correspondent, and says, "Look, there's not an Arab worth his salt in Palestine who wants to be ruled by Jews, but there's no self-respecting Arab who wants to be ruled by bandits." And he's talking about the Mufti, and he's talking implicitly about this radical, extremist, Islamist sort of philosophy.
Oh wait, that's actually really good.
The Mufti is kind of really set the template for this kind of ideology and leadership, at least here. Starting in the 20s, he launched this thing called the Burak campaign. The Burak is the Arabic name for the Western Wall, in which he really promoted this idea that Al-Aqsa is in danger, the Jews want to rebuild the temple, and really in many ways this set the scene for the riots that I mentioned earlier in 1929 in Hebron. But really the Mufti, long before he was hanging out with Hitler and Himmler in Berlin, was a completely committed anti-Semite by any measure. And so so it's
maybe
there was a strong. In the Arab Revolt, you see a strong kind of nationalist themes with Islamic themes. It's not to say, George Antonius was a Christian, and he was very much ideologically on board with the revolt, arguably, and certainly against Zionism. So it is complicated, but it's really in this period that, led by the Mufti, you have this melding of Arab nationalism with Islamism.
Another related point that I didn't know that I found in your book and thought was really interesting was, I think this is when the Peel Commission becomes official, the president of Lebanon at the time, who's a Christian, I think he congratulates, was it Wiseman? And he says, "Look, I can't congratulate you publicly, because if that got out, the Christians in my country, Lebanon, would suffer a massacre." And so I guess, first of all, how seriously do you take that? Was he exaggerating for effect? Was he expressing a real fear? And if so, what does that say about the nature of the Arab Muslim grievances? In other words, a lot of what you hear is that, well, these Jews most of them have recently come from Europe. Most of them were, to find their indigeneity, you'd have to go back a few thousand years. And there's a statute of limitations on that. Well, okay, put that to the side. Lebanese Christians, no one doubts their indigeneity. They're equally indigenous as the Arabs, if not, maybe even more so. But the idea that they were under threat too, simply because they were a religious minority, dissects out the variable of recent arrival and paints a picture of the inherently vulnerable status of religious minorities in Arab Islamic polities.
The Chipotle honey chicken is back. Grilled chicken, chipotle peppers, and pure honey. It takes heat and sweet to a whole new level.
Come with me to the beach. I've got a surprise for you. You'll never guess what's on these rocks. This is what I see, and this is what my Google Pixel sees. Zooming in. Hi, little guy. I can literally see his eyes from all the way back here. Where should I look next?
The relationship between the Christian leadership in Lebanon and the Zionist leadership before 1948 is really fascinating and very much written about as far as I can tell. But you went the instance that you mentioned was in 1937.
I think I had
the report, and it's not just that Emil Edi, the president of Lebanon, sent Weizmann a telegram or something. They were together in the same hotel lobby in Paris, I think it was, and the president of Lebanon raised a toast to Weizmann and said, to the future president of the Jewish state. And you also have reports from the British consulate in Beirut, in which they also confirmed that the Christian element, as they call it, in Lebanon is on the whole happy.
Very good, though.
Prospect of a Jewish state. It was kind of a surprise to everyone, to the Jews, to the Arabs, to the Christians in Lebanon, that the Peel proposal granted Galilee to the Jews, because at the time most of the Galilee was still overwhelmingly Arab in this period, so it was seen as kind of a gift to the Jews, kind of the agricultural hinterland for the future state. And so the Lebanese Christians,
that's pretty good.
But on the whole, were quite pleased with this notion of having a non-Muslim neighbor to their south. But as you say,
that's fine.
Even the Maronite Catholic Archbishop also sent Weizmann a letter of congratulations.
It's both.
You even had the Sunni Muslim prime minister.
Okay, I think it's fine.
Who was on very good.
The same in Massachusetts.
Was on very good relations.
Technically, I did better on the one.
And they actually coordinated the setting up of a settlement on the border, a Jewish settlement on the border of Lebanon. That was all done in cooperation with the Sunni prime minister, because there was this tremendous fear of Islam.
That's a big difference, to be honest.
The Mufti
it's like
flees Palestine, because by this point it's clear to everybody that he's pulling the strings of the revolt. So he flees the country, and he ends up in Lebanon, outside of Beirut. And so the Christian Lebanese, and not just the Christians, were extremely worried about the radicalism taking root there.
And this is at a time when the Christians would have been the majority of Lebanon, right?
So there hasn't been a proper census in Lebanon since 1932, I believe, and even then, I'm not sure how accurate the numbers were. I think the consensus is that there was probably a Christian majority, there was a plurality in that period. But of course, the Christians in Lebanon were always the likeliest to emigrate elsewhere, and their Christian birth rate. And I'm not a Lebanon expert by any stretch, but the Christian population of Lebanon has, in many ways, it's a fascinating, when you look at Lebanon.
Just to mention, he's not an expert.
Israel, right? It was meant to be a Christian national home. It's not a perfect analog, but it's not a crazy thing to say. It was meant to be a Christian national home for the Christians of that area, of Mount Lebanon and Beirut, but also just sort of of the region. It was meant to be a refuge. And I think sometimes those people who call for a right of return for millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, or who call for a one-state solution between the river and the sea. What they're really calling for is for Israel to look like Lebanon, namely a complete mess where everyone's at each other's throats, where politics are purely a sectarian affair, not to mention years of horrible, bloody civil war. I mean, that's the future that awaits.
Somehow that was transferred. That's how
a multi-ethnic mosaic where everyone's battling it out for supremacy because the demographics are so kind of splintered.
I think that's actually slightly even too optimistic because, Lebanon, obviously it had 15-year civil war or something like that. It was in the late 20th century, precisely along this Muslim-Christian split. But there, both sides, they weren't fighting over indigeneity. They were just fighting over, basically political power sharing and so forth, and having different interests. With Israel, I think the passions and the hatreds in some ways are even deeper because the Palestinian politics has elevated to a sacred dogma that no part of the land can be Jewish at all. And so you're right. One of the things I found really flippant when debating people like Dave Smith and who agree with that is like, okay, if you were living somewhere and you were being asked to make a political choice that was very likely to end in civil war, because that's what happens in every neighboring country anytime there's political instability, anytime it's extremely sectarian. All of these countries, whether it's Sunni, Shia, or Christian Muslim, exist on a knife's edge without adding the variable of this is our land and these interlopers don't even belong here. It doesn't even need that variable to ignite in civil war, the Middle East. Can you honestly say that you would just say, oh yeah, sure, okay, 40% risk of civil war, yeah, I'll take that, because of some abstract philosophy about what people deserve? It's like it's display. And by the way, I would say the same thing from the Palestinian side. I'm not saying every Palestinian would agree, or even most would agree, but
well, I got a faster on it. That's always good to improve that.
All ours, but I understand if we live in a one-state reality, it's going to make the Syrian civil war look like child's play. We don't even have the state capacity to control the extreme element on our side if we wanted to, and I'm not sure that we want to. And my children could end up dying in that war. I mean, why would I mandate that? Why would I go charge headfirst into a reality where my whole family could die because of an abstract notion of justice that I've been sold? I think it's I don't really forgive anyone. I forgive people with skin in the game, their opinions and prejudices, but people living in the West thousands of miles away with no skin in the game.
Things at work don't always work, but with Easy Cater, the food always does. Ugh, not again.
Okay. I was very close to
say, well, like obviously they've got to be like.
Oh, that was so good.
And if they're not,
wait, that's actually so.
It just doesn't make any sense to me, and it's really bothersome from a perspective of, I guess, virtue signaling is sort of the word, right? You're saying that because it makes you look good.
I want to see.
And you literally couldn't give a shit if this led to 1 million deaths because it's thousands of miles away. It's not you.
I think that's right. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, no debate there.
Okay, so I guess that gets to the end of my question.
Damn, I need to have even better than top 26.
What do you think about these days? I assume you're paying attention to the latest news, the prospects of a true peace, the splitting of Gaza between Hamas control and Israeli control. What's your optimistic outcome over the next 6 months to a year, and what's your pessimistic outcome?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's hard to be optimistic when it comes to this region, when it comes to the prospects of any kind of Israeli-Palestinian accord. Certainly when it comes to the Gaza Strip, I'm old enough to remember the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. I was already working in journalism at the time when Israel pulled out from Gaza in 2005, when the Bush administration encouraged or sort of pushed Israel to sort of concede to or accept the idea of Palestinian elections, which produced the Hamas victory. 2007, of course, Hamas forcibly pushed out Fatah and the PA from Gaza. I remember all of that, and I remember the looting of the greenhouses that were left behind by the Israeli settlers there. This is not ancient history. It's very hard to be optimistic, let alone the horrors that we've seen on October 7th, and of course the horrors we've seen in this Gaza war over the last 2+ years. So with all of that throat clearing having been made, it's look, things can only I was gonna say things can only get better, but I'm not even sure that's the case. I would like to think that all of these massive pledges of billions of dollars, that they actually happen, that they come to fruition.
Yeah, that's a big.
That there's investment in.
I landed wrong, and it made it so.
That there's some kind of that this technocratic committee can somehow create a better horizon for the Strip. It's hard for me to see from this vantage point, if I'm honest with you. It's hard for me to see how the sticking point, really, the bottom line, even with the most complicated issues in this part of the world, there's typically a bottom line, and I think the bottom line in Gaza is disarmament. And I've really struggled disarming Hamas. There are estimates that Hamas has, the Israeli estimates that Hamas has 60,000 Kalashnikovs, for example. And Hamas is essentially I don't see a world in which they agree to give those up. I really don't. And there are those who say, there's even a member of the Technocratic Committee. The most pro-Hamas member of the Technocratic Committee is the guy who's in charge of tribal affairs. Anyway, he said, look, these AKs, these Kalashnikovs are for self-defense. They can't do any real harm. Well, of course, on October 7th, some of the, much of the death and destruction, the massacres and the atrocities were exactly these kinds of weapons. And it's exactly these kinds of weapons with which Hamas both executes its own people in Gaza and just keeps its iron grip on the territory. So I think it'll ultimately come down to disarmament. So far, no country other than Israel has proved itself willing to risk its own soldiers to disarm any Hamas members, let alone tens of thousands of them. So I think that's the bottom line, and I don't really see how you square that circle. So it kind of, at this point, the likeliest scenario that I see, unfortunately, is that Hamas continues to be the most powerful actor in the half of the Gaza Strip that it still controls, when 99% of Gazans live.
And as Aviv Vertigor put it, I think there's nothing you can build in Gaza that Hamas won't either unbuild, destroy, or repurpose for terror. So as long as that's true, it is hard to be optimistic. And as happy as it was to see that Trump was able to get a quote-unquote peace plan, or really more of a ceasefire, I don't think people should be misled by his salesmanship about what's likely to happen here or what he achieved. So the saga continues. There'll be more to talk about. In the meantime, I think there's a lot in your book, Palestine 1936, The Great Arab Revolt, that people won't have heard or read in other books. So I really recommend that they get it. And it's you tell the history in a very engaging, character-focused way as well. So I really recommend people get that book. Follow you online, Oren Kessler. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you so much, Coleman. It's it's a pleasure and an honor. Thanks so much.
Didn't have radical hierarchy. Was a bit like, I don't know, left wing talking. I think he was. I hear so many people that they're. How is it that easy? Might not be, but there's so many people that. Probably not. It was still faster. Yeah, no, now it's definitely. Yeah, let me try to do the. Yeah, let me not do that. It's an issue though, because exams are bad. Lost all my speed. Oh. What is happening there? Why am I getting? I don't really understand. How? Good. Yeah, how do I go faster? Oh, that's bad. I need to do the diagonal. Have a better time. Why are they suggesting so many live streams?
Try a whole world of
Okay, that's
delicious
good.
chicken refreshers.
By itself.
If Israel is committing a genocide, then I absolutely condemn it, and Bibi Netanyahu should be arrested. Now I'll ask you, can you do what I just did and condemn radical Islam?
Radical ideologies
Unbelievable.
throughout the world
So you'll all lives
are an
matter the
issue to.
When someone is on a subway and is yelling, Christ is king, I'm not going to run. When a Jew is yelling, Baruch Hashem, I'm not going to run. But when someone is yelling Allahu Akbar, I wish it wasn't true, but statistically you have good reason to run because disproportionately the religiously inspired terrorist attacks are committing by who? Not the Buddhists, Muhammad, by Muslims. So can you face the camera and join me in saying that radical Islam and radical Islam specifically should be called out?
Any sort of radical ideologies.
But I find that so problematic. Hey guys, Shabbos Ketz and I'm here. We are at the University of Southern California in the People's Republic of California, and we're going to ask some students some difficult questions. Let's do it, and let's do it.
Wait, that's so good.
September 11th, there have been more than 58,000 Islamic-inspired terrorist attacks across the world on almost every single country on planet Earth. Now, are those individuals who are shouting Allah Akbar, are they authentically interpreting the Quran? Are they authentically interpreting Islamic law? I don't know. I'm not a Muslim. Probably not. But to me, let me just make the claim, then I'll let you respond. Probably not. Is Islam a religion of peace? Sure. I'll be honest. I don't really care. I'm sure it is a religion of peace. I'm sure it has great things in there. But all I care about are the actions, are the behaviors of individuals. And when you have individuals like Ismail Haniyeh, when you have individuals like Yahya Sinwar, when you have individuals like Baku Bakr al-Baghdadi, who say that we want to kill the infidel, we want to reestablish a caliphate, even if that is not an interpretation of the Quran, even if it's not an authentic interpretation of Quranic law, I don't care because they want to kill me. And radical Islamic terrorism, unfortunately, has been a reality that many in the West have had to face. Particularly, I'm a New Yorker, particularly us Americans.
Okay, so within your claim, you're giving out specific people that you, even yourself, are saying you don't know whether their interpretation of the Quran is even correct, right? So why do you classify them as Muslims?
Because they themselves say, as a Muslim, as someone who is commanded by Allah, I'm going to do those things. And that is the exact same justification that Islamic terrorist groups like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, like Boko Haram, like the Taliban have said. So whether they're accurately reading the Quran, I don't care. All I care is they are presenting themselves as Muslims, saying that we are going to kill the infidel and establish our caliphate. And as I always say, the greatest quantitative victims of radical Islam is who? Are Muslims. So Muslims should be the most vocal against radical Islam because they're the ones giving your religion a really crappy name.
Yeah, okay, so my point is radical anything is a threat to America. Radical Christianity, radical Judaism, right?
Right. What even is...
perspective, right? What you're saying is
I know what it is.
Take what these people are doing and crimes that they're committing, right? And then you're tying Islam to them because that's what they're claiming, correct?
Yes. So in New Orleans, for example, on January 1st, there was an individual.
I'll let you finish, right? So my point is, right? I could take the same argument with Israel and say, hey, Netanyahu, the government of Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza, right? Whether they are genuinely, taking what is in the Torah and in their belief system, whether they believe that is true or not, according to the actions that they're committing, they are, to me, they're Jewish people committing a genocide. Is that fair for me to say?
So I'll answer your question with a question. I'm happy to talk about the Middle East, but let's just stay focused on the United States. I'm happy to get to it later.
Relevant.
Sure, I'm happy to get to it, but let's just stay focused on the United States just for 1 second. If you can point to a radical Jew or a radical Christian who have blown up subway stations, who've hijacked planes, who've beheaded individuals.
Apparently there's a radical Christian.
Radical Jews and Christians who've done that in the United States.
Or, I don't know.
I mean,
I can point to 2 radical Islamists just 3 weeks ago.
Could be possible.
IEDs
The one in
a protest against Islam in New York City. So if you can point to radical Jews, radical Hindus, radical Buddhists, or radical Christians who are also beheading people for leaving the faith, who are also throwing IEDs at First Amendment protests, then I would agree with you and I would join with you. But let me just. But can you seriously, can you point to individuals in the United States doing that? Yes or no? Yes or no?
That's not how you have a conversation.
And then I'll let you finish.
That's not a
Yes or no?
conversation. That's not how you have a conversation, though.
Well,
right?
is my point accurate or not? Are radical Christians blowing up subway stations?
That's not fair to say.
Okay,
Because
are radical
you're trying
Jews
to
blowing
pick
up
and
subways?
choose specific things.
Fine, so
that's
I'll make
like
it as broad as
asking, that's like
possible.
me
Are
asking,
other
like,
individuals in the same number as radical Islamists? Are other individuals from other religions blowing up buildings, beheading people, committing honor killings in the same number as radical Islamists? Are they? Maybe educate me. Are they?
I mean, yeah, Israel's committing a genocide.
We'll talk about Israel in a second, because I'm an American and I live here. I'm not an Israeli and I don't live in Israel.
Yeah.
I care about the American people because I live here. So in America, who are the people who are blowing up?
I agree, he can point that out, but then he should debunk him.
Okay.
Didn't say, oh, that's not.
America, right?
Yeah.
You pay taxes?
Yes.
Yeah. How much of your taxes go to Israel?
Again, I will talk about
we're
Israel.
talking about America,
I'm
though.
happy to talk about Israel, but right now I just want to
I'm
focus
bringing
on
my
the United
No,
States.
bro.
Sure.
Not really.
How much of your taxes go to Israel?
Almost nothing. Less than 1%. Well, I'll respond. You ask me the question, I'll answer.
That's not true.
What's not true?
That almost none of your taxes go to Israel.
So how much of the federal budget goes to foreign aid? What percent? Do you know?
A good amount. I know
What
billions
percent?
of dollars. I'm not sure of the percentage.
I'll tell you.
Billions of dollars.
0.8% of the federal budget goes to foreign
That
aid.
is definitely not true.
Look it up right now. I'll pause the count. Look it up right now.
0.8
What percent
what?
of the federal budget goes to foreign aid?
What percent
of the federal budget goes to foreign aid?
Federal budget goes to foreign aid?
Yep. Because we can totally debate opinions, we can't debate facts.
Mm-hmm. So it says about 1%.
About
right?
1%. Of that 1%, so we spend roughly, I think the number is $7 or $8 trillion every single year as the federal government. Less than 1%, as we just demonstrated, goes to foreign aid. Let me finish the point. Less than 1% goes to foreign aid. Of that less than 1%, do you know what percent of the 1% goes to Israel?
What is 1% of a trillion?
What is 1% of a trillion?
Yeah.
What does it have to do with the conversation? You're saying that we spend a lot of our money goes to taxpayer funding to Israel.
What is
even though it has nothing to do with the argument.
What is 1% of a trillion?
10 billion?
Exactly. So how much money is that?
But if you let me finish the point, of that 1%, and it's not 1% of a trillion, it's 1% of 8 trillion. We spend $8 trillion as the federal government. So 1% of 8 trillion, a quick math is what, $80 billion? Maybe someone can fact check me.
$80 billion.
Of that 1%, do you think Israel is the only country we give foreign aid to? Yes or no? Do we give aid to other countries? Yes or no?
It's the only country that we give foreign aid to that's actively committing a genocide.
Sure.
Yeah.
But is Israel the only country we give foreign aid to?
We give the most foreign aid to them.
What do we give? What's the number?
A good amount. I'm not sure
What's
the exact number.
You keep saying that, so much of my taxpayer money. I'll tell you the number. $3.8 billion goes to foreign aid.
That's
you know
a very significant amount.
Take a guess.
It's a very significant amount.
Okay, how much do we give
It's
to
more
Egypt?
than 3.8 billion because we also send
I think it's way less than people realize, but it's like, sure, you can make the point that it's.
And then we send packages routinely that are not accounted for in that $3.8 billion.
Sure.
So
I'll get to that in another second.
Okay.
Again, you keep deflecting. I want to focus more on America, but I'm happy to get engaged in Israel. Of that $3.8 billion, how much do we give to Egypt?
How much?
$3.2 billion. So I find it fascinating that we spend less than 1% of our federal budget on foreign aid. Of that 1%, less than 30% actually go to Israel. And of that $3.8 billion,
Wait, what? I didn't realize they actually
have to be spent on American companies in the United States. We generate hundreds of dollars per $2 we spend.
Oh, it's also pretty.
And by the way, you want to cut foreign aid? I'm happy to, because it's so insignificant to our federal budget. But that totally deflects from the main point, which is us as you're an American citizen, yeah? Us as Americans living here in the United States, we face a problem of radical Islam. And I find so often when I bring this up, so often people will talk about Israel. Great, cut foreign aid. I really don't care. Let's focus on the United States. There's a growing threat of individuals who want me dead because they abhor my values, they abhor my religion, they abhor those I believe in. And if you can point to similar religions that are committing those crimes in similar numbers, I promise you, Muhammad, I will stand with you and call out radical Judaism, radical Christianity, radical Buddhism. But none of those things are happening. Can we not concede that there's a disproportionate amount of Muslim men committing acts in the name of your religion, which I wish they wouldn't? Can we not concede that that is currently happening in the United States?
The thing is, they're radical. They shouldn't even be considered.
Great. So
yes,
you and I, let's call out radical Islam and tell them you are corrupting
I'm going to call out
your
radical
religion.
anything. I'm going to call out radical
so
anything.
Will you point to the camera and say
Okay.
that you condemn radical Islam?
We need to condemn any ideas that are radical.
No, but what you're doing is you're all lives mattering the issue. So when I was on the left, I marched for Black Lives Matter. And when people said all lives matter, we would get upset because we would say, of course all lives matter. But right now we're focusing on black people because they're the ones facing systemic racism.
Yeah.
So it's true. All radicalization is the problem. But again, the prompt is radical Islam because disproportionately, when someone is on a subway and is yelling, Christ is king, I'm not going to run. When a Jew is yelling, Baruch Hashem, I'm not going to run. But when someone is yelling Allahu Akbar, I wish it wasn't true, but statistically you have good reason to run because disproportionately the religiously inspired terrorist attacks are committing by who? Not the Buddhists, Muhammad, by Muslims. So can you face the camera and join me in saying that radical Islam and radical Islam specifically should be called out?
Any sort of radical ideologies.
But I find that so problematic.
Any sort of radical ideologies in the world affect everyone negatively.
Wow.
There you go.
I find it really remarkable that you are unwilling to stand up and actually defend your own faith. I'm not a Muslim, and I hate the fact that hundreds of Muslims are being unfairly blamed for radical Islam. And I find it remarkable that you as a Muslim are unwilling to join the hundreds of millions of people in your own faith who are trying to battle radicalism. I find that really, really
The thing
sad.
is, the issue is, this isn't really even about like Islam or anything. The issue is that radical ideologies in general, specifically, are a big issue. So why come out here, say you're gonna have a conversation, right? And say, oh, radical Islam is an issue, right? Why don't you say radical ideologies are an issue? So is it because you inherently think that that Islam is a dangerous religion?
No, actually,
because that's what I would assume. That's what I'm sure every single person that's walking through here is assuming.
Well, then they're welcome to have a conversation, engage in nuance. I can't be responsible for people's assumptions on my beliefs. What I will say is I would actually argue...
the conversation isn't happening in good faith. That's what I'm trying to say.
So let me be as honest and genuine and transparent as I can. You don't even know what I believe because you're not letting me finish it.
No,
point.
Just because you're saying, oh, I'm willing to have a conversation does not equate to you having that conversation in good faith.
So let me...
That was a good...
articulate and public. No, I don't want to face the camera. I want to face you. Because I am upset that radical Islamists like Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Hamir and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi have tarnished your faith. Because I don't believe, that all Muslims are inherently prone to terrorism. That is a disgusting thing to believe.
You shouldn't believe that any Muslim is prone to terrorism,
correct.
right?
I don't believe that. That's what I'm saying right now. So let me continue. I'm glad we're in agreement.
Oh my gosh, that's so annoying.
Is that your religion is being unfairly tarnished by a radical few. And I find it remarkable that I'm willing to defend your religion and saying this is not all Muslims and I'm going to applaud radical Islam, and you can't. That to me is really fascinating. So I'll ask you one last time.
Could you face the camera and say, radical Judaism is an issue?
Radical Judaism is an issue, and if there's any radical Jew who is committing acts of terrorism against Jews,
I agree it's an...
but like... I condemn him.
So do you condemn Islam? Do you condemn Israel?
No, because I don't believe that Israel is committing a genocide.
So you won't do that.
So you won't do that. Again, you're changing the goalpost.
It's not the goalpost. It has to do with radical ideologies in the first place.
Happy to. If Israel is committing a genocide, then I absolutely condemn it, and Bibi Netanyahu should be arrested. Now I'll ask you, can you do what I just did and condemn radical Islam?
Radical ideologies?
Unbelievable.
Throughout the world,
so you'll all lives
are an
matter
issue to...
Oh, nice. Bro, my landings are getting so...
Cart takes a quarter?
It's a rental. Aldi doesn't pay for cart wranglers.
So how come, can I ask, how come you forced me to condemn radical Judaism, which I had no problem doing?
I mean, I didn't force you to.
How come you asked me to condemn radical Judaism and I had no problem doing
it?
But when
How did I get
radical Islam, all of a sudden it's problematic.
Because the conversation you're having is not in good faith.
So when you asked me to condemn radical Judaism, that was not in good faith? When you asked me to do it?
No.
Oh, that was
in good faith.
No, so, like I'm saying, it wasn't not in good faith. That's not.
So it was in good faith. Okay, so then I'm going to reciprocate. I, in good faith, am going to ask you: can you condemn the worst elements of your religion?
No, because I don't consider my religion to have those bad elements. I don't consider people that
ISIS,
are radical.
Boko Haram, Al Qaeda, the
I don't
Taliban.
consider them Muslim.
None of those people
I don't
are
consider
Muslims.
them Muslim. No.
Okay, so if Israel's committing a genocide, I can just
and
arbitrarily
neither would
decide they're
majority
not
of the Muslim
Jewish.
world. Neither would majority of the Muslim world
Great.
consider those ideologies as Muslim. And the fact that you're sitting here and saying that radical Islam, targeting it specifically on a Friday, that in itself is racist, and that in itself is a conversation being had in bad faith. Just because you're saying,
I feel like it's not racist to call out real.
Being in good faith. That's the biggest issue with the board that you're having up here, right? If you came up and said radical ideologies in the United States are a threat to America, and then you sat here and said, oh,
I mean, he's right also, but like, it's also not. Doesn't matter.
Then you had a conversation with me.
Radical ideologies of any kind are bad.
Like, you don't think
you're
singling out Islam in this? You don't think that?
I am singling out radical Islam because, as I said, they're the ones who are trying to kill
radical Islam? Like,
I already told you. Terrorist organizations like the Taliban, Boko Haram, Al Qaeda, and ISIS, who have explicitly stated that they want to kill the infidel and are currently doing it. As I said, more than 58,000. Well, hang on.
It was not gonna even.
58,000 terrorist attacks have been committed by Islamists in the name of Islam. And so I'm willing to condemn radical Islam in the same way I'm willing to condemn radical Judaism. And I find it remarkable, I really do, that what you're doing is the exact same thing that conservatives did during Black Lives Matter. Whereby if you truly cared about, Black lives, why are you focusing on black people? Focus on all lives. Focus on all people who are facing systemic oppression. And we said no, because right now the problem is black people. They're facing systemic racism. So I don't understand why you're so particular in one sense and then so universal in the other sense. Why can't you just
that was cool.
Of your religion? I'm trying to help you. Honestly, I am.
It's because the Black Lives Matter was a movement, right? to show the world that black people are dealing with systemic injustice, right?
Yep.
Right now, the entire world is on fire, and it has nothing to do with religious ideologies, right?
It doesn't have to
violence in the world.
Okay, we have to stop the video because Daniel just told me that some of you are watching this, but you're not actually subscribing or even sharing this with a friend. We all have that one annoying guy in our friend group who disagrees with like everything we say. So make sure, take 5 seconds and just share it with that dude. And now let's get back to the video. Violence committed in the name of Islam. And I want to help your religion and say that they are not doing it in a proper way, and you won't, and I find that remarkable.
Oh my gosh,
Muslim, I'm telling you, right? Who you're considering as these radical people that are committing these acts of violence, right? If I'm telling you straight up that, hey, they're not Muslim, why are you still labeling them as radical Muslims?
Well, I'll answer you. I'll tell you in the same way I already told you. Because when an individual like Yahya Sinwar says, I am, as a Muslim man, am going to do this thing in the name of Allah, I have no choice but to take him seriously as a deliberate, fully functioned human being as part of Western civilization.
How is that fair?
I would be stupid. I agree, it's not fair. That's why I wish you would call out radical Islam, because it's not fair to your religion. So why am I, as like the white dude, trying to help Islam, and you, as the actual Muslim, won't? I find that remarkable.
I don't think this is helping anyone.
We actually had a Muslim about an hour ago sit down, and he unquestionably was able to condemn radical Islam, because the people who are the largest victims of radical Islam, you know who they are, Muhammad? It's not white dudes like me. They are Muslims, so why won't you help your fellow brethren?
Because my issue is, right, radical Islam in itself is like an oxymoron. Like, that's my point. It doesn't even exist.
So
right?
you're saying when ISIS beheaded Christians
Yeah.
for not bowing down, when ISIS beheaded Christians for not converting to Islam, what was that? If you said it's not real, what is it then?
I never said that it wasn't real, right?
You just said that's not a thing. So what is it then?
Yeah, I'm saying that.
So what is it?
Yeah, I'm saying that violence in Islam is not a thing. Like,
so when people say, in the name of Allah, I'm going to behead Christians because they won't convert to Islam, if you're saying that's not a thing, what is it?
That's terrorism. That's radical violence.
So So are you willing to condemn Islamic terrorism?
I'm willing to condemn terrorism.
Again, I think we're going in circles here.
What is Islamic terrorism? That doesn't
I'll
even make
explain
sense.
for the 7th
Is there
time.
Jewish terrorism?
If there are Jews committing acts of terrorism in the name of their religion, absolutely, I will call it out. I don't understand why this is so problematic. If there are Christians committing acts of terrorism in the name of Christianity, I will call it out. But as I keep going back to, and this is where I say we're going in circles, disproportionately, the acts of terrorism that are being committed in the world, number one, and the acts of terrorism committed by people in the name of their own religion are disproportionately being committed not by the Scientologists, not by the Mormons of Utah, but by who?
In the world?
The Muslims, particularly coming from the Middle East. And I wish that wasn't true, because Islam has much to teach the world. In fact,
this is an annoying
believe in the Hebrew Bible that we have an appreciation to Islam, an appreciation to Christianity, because they brought about messianic expectations and they brought about monotheism. And it bothers me to no end that your religion is being tarnished by these awful human beings, and you won't even call them out.
Yeah, because the conversation is inherently problematic.
What
right?
specifically?
Okay, let me tell you this. You said that radical Muslims are the biggest cause of violence in the entire world, right?
Yes, that's not conjecture or speculation. I'm happy if you want to fact check me again. You can look up right now of the people committing acts of terrorism in the name of religion, which religion is disproportionately represented?
Hold on. So Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza, right? So we know, at minimum, according to, you gave me the Gaza Health Ministry, 72,000 according to the Gaza Health Ministry. That number is outdated. There's people in the rubble. It's easily over 100,000, right? What is that?
So I would say two things.
That's committed by the state of Israel.
Sure, I would say.
Who is claiming to be Jewish? Is it fair for me to say that Judaism is the biggest cause of violence in the entire world?
If they were committing genocide, it would be a fair
thing to say. They are committing genocide. So by definition, ICJ, they're committing genocide.
First of all, the ICJ did not say that. The ICJ chief actually came out and said.
Amnesty International.
Amnesty International also said that the United States was committing genocide. So if you want to make an argument of authority, that's a different argument. Sorry?
Where were they committing genocide?
They are currently committing a genocide against African Americans. So if you want to make an argument of authority, that's one thing.
United States is?
Yes. So if you want to make an argument of authority that,
apparently that's what
it must be true. All the organizations were saying in the 1930s and 40s that Jews were not being gassed. So you have to quantify the claim or qualify the claim. What I will say, because again, you keep moving the goalpost to Israel, which I find remarkable.
Okay, sure. How about
happy to respond to Israel.
How about Haaretz?
I'll respond to the accusations right now. When you say the Gaza Health Ministry, who runs the Gaza Health Ministry? Just educate me.
What are you going to say? Hamas?
No, I want you to say.
What are you going to say?
I want to listen to you.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure? Okay, so who currently runs Gaza? What's the government representation?
Hamas.
Hamas. Yeah. So the health ministry of the government of Gaza would therefore be who?
It It would be Hamas.
Hamas, great.
Yeah.
So you're saying we should trust a terrorist organization that committed an actual genocide on October 7th when it comes to their own numbers. Okay, I'm willing to concede that argument for whatever bizarre reason. I'm willing to concede it. Of the 72,000...
I could say the same exact thing for Israel, though.
Well, I didn't make the point yet. Of the 72,000 people that you said have been killed, I'm just curious, how many has Hamas said are part of Hamas in that 72,000 number? What has Hamas said?
What would you say?
No, I'm asking you the question.
What has Hamas said?
I'm happy to educate you after, but first I want to know if you know. Do you know?
No, I'm not sure.
You don't know, so I'll tell you. Hamas has said 0. Hamas does not count any of their members who were actually killed in October 7th. Does that strike you as odd, that they don't actually count their own combatants as part of the death toll?
Find a great rental car deal with Kayak. And find the confidence to do important things on your phone. Even if you still wear skinny jeans.
Dealing with information overload, Notebook LM can turn dense documents into dialogue with audio overviews, visualize connections from scattered sources with mind maps, and more. Surface new insights from your sources with Google Workspace.
Is that odd?
I mean, frankly speaking, I don't even think what you're saying is like true at all. Like 72,000 is a number on the low end.
Okay,
right?
you're still not answering my question.
So,
how many of that, let's say it's 100,000. Again, I'm willing to concede everything in this conversation. How many of that 100,000 are Hamas members?
Let's say 50% of them are.
Great.
Right?
If it's 50%, that would actually be the lowest combatant-civilian ratio of any war ever fought in modern warfare. Lower than Fallujah, lower than Mosul, lower than World War II. Was Fallujah a genocide? Was Mosul a genocide? Was World War II a genocide?
Let me go back to your point.
If you're saying that genocide is when people died, then every single war ever fought in human history would be a genocide.
Hold on. Let me go back to your point. So
let me go back to your point. Because you keep moving the goalposts. I want to talk about radicalism in the United States, and you keep moving to Israel, which I find all the individuals keep doing when they don't want to actually respond to
Israel
radicalism.
is an entity of the United States. Like, it's very much.
What does that have to do with Americans, Americans living in America?
Let's go back to let's go to the point that I was talking about. 50,000 out of 100,000 people, let's just say are Hamas members for this argument, right?
Sure.
You stated earlier that there's 58,000 instances of Islamic radical terrorism, right?
Yeah.
So, if so the state of Israel kills 50,000 people, right? Within the past, what?
That was gonna be a hit.
2 or 3 years, right?
Okay.
State of Israel kills 50,000 innocent civilians within the past 2 or 3 years.
Oh, nice.
And then you're trying to say, from 9/11 on, there's been 58,000 instances of radical Islamic terrorism.
Yep.
Right? Those like.
So I think you're not understanding the statistics. What you're trying to argue is that would be 50,000 different acts of Jewish terrorism. When I say 58,000 acts of Islamic terrorism, that does not mean 58,000 people have died. In fact, far more than 58,000 people have died. That would be, in fact, if we were to want to take Syria as an example, if we were to use your logic, death would be an act of terrorism.
But it was gonna be
alone in Syria in the last 6 years, 1 million acts of radical Islamic terrorism, because that's how many
Whoa, what is that?
by the Syrian Islamists. But of
That
course,
was pretty
talk about that, even though we as Americans also give foreign aid to Syria. So I'm actually not sure why people always focus on Israeli foreign aid. Great, let's cut it. But no one ever wants to talk about Syrian foreign aid, Egyptian foreign aid. There's a massacre against Christians in Nigeria today. We've given $1.5 billion. What exactly are we getting from that? You know, we give Somalia $1 billion in foreign aid. What exactly have we gotten from Somalia? But again, I want to go back to radical Islam because that was the prompt of this conversation. About Israel. But again, I'm happy to concede the point and foreign aid because it's so inconsequential. And by the way, if you don't want innocent civilians to die, then I would expect that you would join me in calling Hamas the radical Islamist government to surrender, right? Should they surrender?
I think, my point is that there should be no violence in the world entirely.
I agree. So should Hamas surrender and return their arms?
That's such a pointed question. Like that's correct. Yeah. So what is the point of that?
Surrender?
Should Israel should Israel stop bombing Lebanon?
Yes, absolutely. The moment Hezbollah renounces their arms, they should stop. Yeah.
So could I not, I'm not saying I'm a Hamas sympathizer, but could I not make the same argument that the moment that Israel stops bombing Gaza, that Hamas should concede?
Well, the problem with that argument is it fundamentally ignores that on October 6th, how many Gazans were being bombed by Israeli
airplanes? And what about since 1948? What about the occupation that's taken place since 1948?
Let's go even earlier. Let's go to 1929. Actually, pick a year. You pick a year. What year do you want to talk about?
Let's go back to Theodore Herzl. How about
that? Let's go even earlier.
Let's go even before that.
I agree. Let's go earlier. When do you want to? You tell me. You want to go 1897? Sure. What's the claim about Theodore Herzl?
Yeah. So Zionism.
Yep.
Would you say it's a Jewish belief?
It depends how you're defining Jewish belief.
Depends on Jewish belief.
Yeah, as in how are you defining it? And
no,
then I can
I'm
answer.
asking you. I'm not Jewish.
Well, I can answer it based on how I'm defining a Jewish belief. As in, is it a moral code that you find in the Hebrew Bible? Yeah. As in, Orthodox Jews pray 3 times a day. You know what direction they face when they pray?
What?
They face Jerusalem. In their what?
Okay.
Okay.
That's
and
what the first direction that Muslims pray
Oh
towards.
my God.
Right, and now they don't. Now they pray to Mecca. But I digress. In those thrice daily prayers, you know what Orthodox Jews say dozens and dozens of times every single day?
Yeah. What is it?
The return to Zion.
Okay.
So again, that's why I want to quantify what you're refining as a Jewish belief, because you cannot open a Hebrew Bible and go to a random page and it does not talk about Eretz Yisroel. It does not talk about the land of Zion. So if you want to make an argument of political Zionism, that's why I'm interested in how you're defining it. But from a theological perspective, yeah, Jews are the only religion that I know of that are actually named from the country they come from.
So
Jews come from Judea. So I find it remarkable that individuals will make the argument that Jews somehow are not indigenous to their ancestral homeland. So getting super off topic. I'd rather talk about radical
so you're
Islam
saying
and how
there's
it
a
affects
difference.
Americans.
So you're saying there's a difference between religious Zionism and political Zionism?
Again, it depends how you're defining these things.
But no, there should be one definition for things, right?
Sure.
Why
So
is
I'm
there
happy
multiple
to concede.
definitions?
I'm happy to concede that Jews should have self-determination in their ancestral homeland, in the same way that Palestinians should have self-determination in their homeland. The problem is, what is the entity that is keeping that up? That is not preventing that from happening. I'll give you a clue. It's Hamas. So will you look into the paper and say, Hamas, you radical Islamists, I want Palestinians for there to be a state. You should disarm. Will you do that? Because I think if Hamas was able to disarm and we were able to bring democracy, I think you would have a Palestinian state, which I would.
What?
So are you willing to look
How
at
did I go that far?
now to disarm? Will you do
Well,
it?
I think the biggest
Will you do
thing,
it? Wait, will you do it? Before you get to the biggest
you're
thing,
doing
will
this
you do
like
it?
you're doing this like, will you do it? Will you do it? No.
Yes, in the same way you did it to me, and I'm happy to do it. Let me ready? I'll do it again. If you're a radical Jew and you're committing terrorism in the name of Judaism, I absolutely condemn you and you should stop. And Hamas, if you are using civilians to hide underneath, and if you are using radical Islamism to commit acts of terrorism, you should also stop. Now, will you do the exact same thing? No. Okay. I find that remarkable. And again, I want to help Islam, but it seems like you don't.
No, I think your conversation and your entire argument
is in bad faith.
Inherently in bad faith and
you said it
flawed.
already.
So that's the issue.
So what specifically can I do to show it's not in bad faith? What specifically am I doing that's in bad faith?
I mean, it's the fact that you're all like, you're saying, okay, look at the camera. As a Muslim person, look at the camera.
Okay,
and
I'll
say
look at you.
Hamas is bad.
I want Hamas to disarm. Do you want Hamas to disarm?
I want Israel to disarm.
Okay, sure. Do you want Hamas to disarm?
Sure, yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Great. Why?
Because as of right now, let me put some context to it. How about
Sure.
this? Right? Whenever a country is oppressed, right? Whenever people are oppressed, they're going to fight back. Yes or no?
It depends how you're defining oppression.
No. Yeah. How is it? It depends. If like anyone, if any one of you, if I'm absolutely beating the shit out of you, would you not fight back?
Well, in that sense, absolutely. But in the context of
so-
Gaza, who rules Gaza? Is it the Israeli government or is it the Palestinian government?
I mean, yeah. Since 1945, right? We have.
You mean 1948?
1940, whatever. 1948.
That's not whatever. These things matter.
1948. Israel has been committing an active
Why am I going so?
occupation of Palestinian land.
Oh, so how many? If that's true, how many Israelis currently live in Gaza? If they're occupying the land.
That's such a flawed argument. That's really.
Why? Wait, that's actually
Because the occupation requires people to occupy the land.
Yeah,
but you're making this new category. You can occupy a land and actually not control it, not rule it, and not live in it.
You guys do control it. You do control it.
I don't know why you're saying you guys. I'm an American, so,
my fault.
Don't conflate me.
I
But
apologize.
again, I want to understand when you say that it's occupied, how many Israelis live in Gaza today? What's the number?
That shouldn't define occupation.
Probably. By the way, the guy sitting there is probably a rich guy that can.
Israel controls the sea. Israel controls the land. Israel controls the electricity that goes into Gaza.
Really?
And Israel controls the food that goes into Gaza.
That's interesting.
When October 7th happened,
True,
what did
yeah,
Israel
that's
do?
kind-
They cut off food. They cut off electricity. They started shooting at ships in the boats. What does that mean? That means they have control over those parts of Gaza. What is that by definition? That is occupation.
Sure. So leaving aside the factual inaccuracies, which I'm happy to get to
Where
in a
are the
second.
factual inaccuracies?
Let's go with starvation, for example.
Yeah.
According to Hamas's own numbers, how many Gazans since October 7th have died of starvation?
You have to leave.
Okay.
Huh? You got 5 seconds.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. I appreciate it, Muhammad.
All right.
Good meeting you.
Good to meet you as well.
All right. And even though we obviously disagree, at least we're able to do it in a civil way. Okay, that was a crazy conversation. I learned a lot, including I really want to move back to New York. But if you want to see more of these crazy conversations, make sure you like, subscribe, and follow Let's Do Something at the link below.
I'll come back up.
At Amica, we know you'll always find ways to look out for them.
Oh my gosh. Let's go on fast.
We'll build a plan to make sure you always
Okay, it's not.
get your quote today.
I will take a break though.
Dude, I can't.
It's a really high bar entry though. I need to get above, below, I mean below top 26, which is pretty hard.